some of you, I think, may have taken my class before. I've heard of people coming to my class. So if we've met before, I can't see you right at this moment, but thank you for coming. Welcome back. For those who don't know me, this is a little bit on my background. I have founded my company about 13 years ago. My background is all about marketing and communication. I have more than 20 years experience of digital marketing. I've worked for big companies like First Data and Western Union and Liberty Mutual. And then my consulting practice, again, I started in a few years back. I've taught hundreds of workshops, both in person and online. And along with my consulting practice, I have been teaching in several different or at several different universities around the Boston area. So I've taught for Questrom in their MBA program, and at BU, I've taught at Emerson, and I've also taught at Harvard Extension School. But now I am teaching at Harvard in professional development. And this class is, this webinar today is sort of a portion of the things we talk about in the class that I teach for Harvard Professional Development, which is digital marketing strategy. This is a course that we run in person on campus a few times a year. And we tackle topics like what we're going to talk about today. And we break down this sort of vast digital landscape and really get organized in how to approach these different digital strategies. So we really work hard to make this a really awesome experience on campus. So love connecting with you here through Zoom, but it's also great to be in person sometimes. So that's my little plug for the class. For today, sorry, there's just like a slight delay as I'm clicking through slides, so just give me a moment there. So for today, we're going to be talking about the trends that have been really emerging lately, particularly with Threads and Twitter switching to X. So we're going to look at kind of this landscape and how this is actually not new. There has been constant churn with social media landscape since social media has been a part of our marketing arsenal. We'll look at a small sample activity like what we do in class to help us evaluate new media, and then we'll wrap up with some live Q&A so we can just kind of talk in real time and kind of get some of your questions answered. So I hope that sounds like a good start for you guys. Okay, so one of the things that I always kick off class with is asking, what are your biggest challenges? What are the biggest challenges you're facing in digital marketing? And what you're looking at on this slide is pretty much the buckets that I always hear. So no matter the span of time of how much I've been working in this space, people talk about, you know, the constantly changing technology, the platform changes, the audience fragmentation that only seems to get worse. Team alignment, how do we work across so many disparate teams and different skill sets? So skilled resources are a huge challenge. Right now, data and the explosion of data and the expectation of using data as part of our digital strategy is really starting to come into the forefront. And then of course, leadership and client expectations. So today we're going to look at this in particular. We're going to be talking about changing technology and then how that is kind of compelled a lot of times by our leadership and client expectations. I just wanted to take a little pause there. Something would have blipped in front of the slide a minute ago. And Jacqueline, it was someone raising their hand. So I don't know if you want to disable that during the presentation, just as a heads up. Okay. So these are what we're specifically talking about today. So we can't cover everything. Those of you that have worked with me before and know me know that I can talk about this topic for days on end, but we're going to focus today on changing technology and leadership expectations. Okay, so are you familiar with the term shiny object syndrome? You can tell me in chat. Shiny object syndrome, if you've never heard of this before, is what happens when a new technology comes on scene, and perhaps it's a new platform, or maybe it's a new tool, and all of a sudden it's the rage. You're hearing about it everywhere, it's all over media, and everyone's talking about it. So we get kind of compelled by this shiny object syndrome, and we're immediately looking for ways to use it and to jump into these new technologies. So I wanted to start right here and say, is anyone on your team prone to shiny object syndrome? And this is going to be a little poll, so what you'll see pop up in front of you is just to ask if you work with anyone who maybe is afflicted with this. Oh, look at that. Looks like there's some yeses. Yes and maybes. All right, are we ready? Okay, I'm going to do the stop. Do I just do stop sharing? So stop sharing, share results. All right, are you able to see the results? It looks like about 52% of you say yes, 37 say maybe. That might be guarded, so that's fine. And then 11% no. So good for the no's. That's nice to know that everyone's got a good steady presence to fight off shiny object syndrome. But I think what it shows us is that we still are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. And it was when I reached out to the professional development team about this webinar, it was due to the fact that we had just seen this fast emergence of Meta putting forward Threads, which was considered to be a Twitter killer. And then thinking about how Twitter was quickly rebranding to become X. So that was the genesis of what I wanted to talk about today, and how that really is another example of shiny object syndrome. And here we've been in this digital space for 15, 20 years. And here we're still kind of afflicted with some of these same challenges, which is this constant feeling that we're missing out. I call it social media FOMO, right? It's like the idea that if we're not in this new platform, we might miss out on getting millions of followers, or we might be missing something that is an opportunity that is automatically going to happen just based on our participation in that platform. That, I just want to remind you, is more old school thinking. That's broadcast thinking that we just sort of hang our flag and everyone will see it. And it really, with digital marketing, we have to be much more mindful about what we're doing in these spaces. So why do we still have to think about shiny object syndrome, and why does it matter? What is the implication for us as digital marketers? Well, first of all, if you're seeing this in your teams, please have a little bit of understanding that this happens. We are all falling prey to the media drivers behind this. Meta, Twitter X, even Clubhouse. These are, but Meta and Twitter in particular, these are big companies. There are PR engines behind us. A lot of times what we're seeing is just the media coverage based on PR pushes that are meant to sort of stoke our interest and get us excited about these platforms. So, we still think we might miss that chance. So the other thing is that we can still be making choices based on our personal preferences for different platforms versus our business objectives. Like, what do we really need from that platform? So in that case, and this is very understandable too, sometimes, and I work with clients that are like, well, I don't like Twitter. I don't get it. I don't like it. I don't think we should be on it. So, and I don't know, maybe some of you have experienced that as well, but personal reasons aren't why we choose a platform. We want to choose those for business reasons. And I'll skip ahead here, but part of the reason that we have that experience is because the way we experience these digital platforms are really based on the algorithms and our own behaviors, what we like, what we read, what we engage with. Those algorithms feed back that content, that type of content to us. So our experiences within these different applications are very unique to us. So we might not see the content that someone else sees. We might not have that similar experience. So I find that it's another thing we have to remind ourselves, that we need to evaluate platforms based on what our customers are doing there, what they do for our business versus the platform just on its own. Does that make sense? All right, the last thing I want to make a point of, and just as a reminder, is that we underestimate the power sometimes of these digital businesses and the implications of that. So while everyone is jumping in and thinking about Threads, there are some other things to consider. So if you came in a little fast onto Threads, you may have missed the part about that they are connected to your Instagram account. So on the one hand, that's a real pro because you start Threads with a following. It automatically connects your folks from Instagram. But if you decided to leave Threads, it also collapses your Instagram file, your Instagram platform. So that is something to consider. But the bigger issue here that I want to just remind you of is that Meta is a huge player in this space. So Meta owns Facebook, WhatsApp, now Threads, as well as Instagram. So those are kind of the main players. So they are 3 out of the top 5 main platforms in all of social media. So it's just something to remind ourselves. Why? Because Meta makes changes to its business model, and those changes then have an implication on our business. Okay, so the other reason we want to look at this is that some of these platforms come and go. So anytime that we're looking at trying to decide, what platform to use versus what to maybe skip or wait and see, it's because we feel this pressure that we're missing out if we don't get into it. But there have been so many changes over the past several years. So I wanted to cover those really quickly, just so we can remind ourselves of why we should be a little more cautionary when we do this. So first one right out of the gate is Facebook. Facebook has been in decline for many years, right? Depending who you talk to. So what I mean by this is that I frequently hear, and I think many of you likely hear this too, is that, well, millennials aren't using Facebook. They prefer Instagram. Gen Z, they're just on TikTok. Why are we even bothering with Facebook? Or, my daughter thinks Facebook's uncool, so maybe we shouldn't be running our ads there anymore. these are all just these kind of examples, again, of personalized preference to a platform versus the business going on here. Now, Facebook, I'm not defending Facebook for this, but Facebook changed their strategy or changed their platform back in 2013 when they started going direct to push Facebook advertising. They started to suppress the traffic that we gained in organic pages and organic engagement that we had from building our brand pages on Facebook. So during that time, that shift meant that all of this organic engagement that we have been enjoying as brands on their platform started to reduce dramatically. So I was working with a client at a time that had over 1 million followers and was only seeing about 1,200 interactions a day on there, or was seeing 1,200 interactions a day and went down to like a dozen. So that shift was pretty dramatic for a lot of marketers when it happened. So again, though, Facebook itself, though, out of the suite of Meta products that exist in the social media space, their growth has slowed only because their growth has been so voluminous that it's nearly about everyone in the world can be attached to Facebook through their different connections. So the slowing of Facebook's growth shouldn't be used as an indicator that they are not a big player in this space. They still have one of the largest walled gardens because of all the advertising data and user data that they have. But in general, too, they still have, 2.96 billion monthly active users and 2.06 billion daily active users. So while it feels like, Facebook has become less popular, and certainly there are a lot of people that claim they don't like to use it as much, by the numbers, it's still a very prominent platform. So just something to think about versus getting swept up in the conversation of why it's not as great as it used to be. Now, here's another example, which is Clubhouse. Clubhouse came about in 2020. Did anyone join Clubhouse? It got really popular during the pandemic. It was hotly talked about, especially on places like LinkedIn. And it was an invite-only app. It was meant to kind of bring people together for these discussions, these very kind of rarefied discussions where you seem to have reach with very popular people or kind of influencers in this space. It got so much attention, the valuation went up to $4.4 billion in 2021. So this is another thing. Sometimes we assume the company is successful because these valuations come in so high. However, they really failed to maintain that initial excitement about the platform. And so as of this year, they have laid off 50% of their workforce as of April of 2023. But then just last week, literally, I was like fine tuning this presentation, and here's some news about Clubhouse. They are coming back. They've restructured themselves. They are now trying to be in the chat space. The quote from them is to picture, imagine your group texts and your Instagram stories met at a park, talked for hours, and became best friends and fell in love. So that's the new thing coming forward with Clubhouse. So we'll wait and see if this is a rise and fall or if this is a redemption story for Clubhouse. But to me, it's just another example of why we don't necessarily go all in just because we have a shiny object or a new platform. We have to be careful on what we invest, even what we invest in our time, because it can really be detrimental to our team's time if we are building something for platforms that aren't really sustainable. Okay, and my last example, was anyone using Meerkat or Vine at any point in time? Maybe you have to dial back a few years. Maybe some of you weren't maybe in the space yet or still working in this space. So Meerkat and Vine were both short form video applications, platforms. And especially with Vine, it was mobile only, just really short form. These were both precursors to TikTok. And what they were is short videos that would play in loop. Meerkat was used by brands like GE. So there were large brands that had put content out on these platforms. Vine had several large companies and kind of influencers building their brands there. Vine actually had, if anyone, there was a really great case study on Vine for Lowe's, and they were showing just quick fix ideas on Lowe's. It's a really, really popular campaign, got them a lot of attention. So both of these apps had millions of followers and users and had even big brands that were using them as part of their communication strategy, but both failed to be profitable. So Meerkat was closed in 2015, and then Vine actually was closed in 2016. So there have been a few of these scattered about. Does anyone in chat, any other platforms that you have seen come and go? Well, a couple of others are, do you remember Google Circles? Was anyone using Google Circles? That one was trying to be everything to everybody. All right, so I give you those examples because they feel like they could be way back in history, even 2020 when Clubhouse, what even happened to Clubhouse? But these are all great examples of why we need to be careful about what we do in this digital landscape, and then how do we actually manage this digital landscape. So now it takes us back to what's happening with Threads and with Twitter X. So do we invest in Threads, and do we divest in Twitter because it's now called X? These can be really challenging to kind of work out in isolation. So how do we do this? It's easy for us to get swept up in the changes with the PR and kind of what's happening in the media and what all the conversation is about. If we think about Threads, for example, if we just start there, I would still say that application is still in a very nascent stage. They don't have all the tools rolled out. It's already seen a huge a decline in daily active users, something about 80% of daily active users, down about 80% on their daily active users. They got a lot of PR in the early stages because Meta was making all these announcements that they had gotten up to 100 million followers just within the first few days of kind of starting the app. Remembering, or again, the critical thinking there is that that's because they had connected to Instagram. So it was really easy for people to jump on board through your connections and find out, they're prompting people on Instagram to try Threads and to download Threads. So they had already sort of baked that in, which I think is really smart. But like everything else, they didn't have tools there, and they didn't have people kind of weren't able to sort of find real engagement there. So it was definitely pushed forward to be something that could compete with Twitter X, because X was having some challenges. But at the same time, the app itself hasn't really developed. Meta obviously has one of the largest ad data networks in the world. Does it need to be bigger? The other thing I would say to consider as a business is that Meta having all these different platforms in their umbrella, it's almost feeling like we're going back to like big media companies again. So there used to be just a few networks, for example, that kind of maintained all the control over these different audiences. And Meta is definitely moving in that direction too, to be the biggest dog on the porch. So here we have X. Now, what do we do about X? So some people, and a lot of news and PR around X is that it seems volatile. They've done a lot of layoffs, and Elon Musk, the way he's changing things, is it stable or what's going on? Then this abrupt rebrand, the abrupt rebrand. Can you think of why a rebrand like that, such a dramatic rebrand, might happen so quickly after Threads came out? I don't know if that was in their strategy or not. However, I will say that Twitter already had a somewhat negative brand image in a lot of ways, because it has been, a lot of people don't like it. There were a lot of things during the elections in the US that made Twitter seem like a place that was just kind of hate speech and people not really enjoying their time on Twitter. Twitter has less monthly active users, but those active users tend to be very, very influential. So it has still been a mainstay for influencers and for media and news for sure. But I would garner to think that, I'm not sure Elon Musk is bothered by people what their opinions are about the rebrand name. I think all of that conversation gets the news about Twitter X and keeps Twitter X in the news. So I think all of the experts that have been about saying it was a horror show from a branding perspective, and that it certainly didn't seem like a wise move from a branding perspective. All those conversations that are happening by all of us experts talking about it in this, other space, is just more search engine marketing for Elon Musk to kind of keep his product in the news and keep people considering it. But in the meantime, they have been adding more tools like community tools and even kind of data plays, so you can get information on the people that follow you on Twitter. So these are things that we have to think about before we're making abrupt changes in or out, or if we're adding on any new platforms. Okay, so another exercise here, and this is something like what we do in class. Stepping back for a minute, think about what your customers want from your brand and when they engage with you on social media. Like, what is the type of content that they are responding to? So one of the things that we sometimes, I think, mistakenly do is we think that all these different social channels and platforms are just a great place to post more content. It gives us yet another place to offer a sale or a promotion or to talk about ourselves. But what we find is that people want different things from social media. They don't always want to be sold to. They are there to build connections and to kind of build connections with each other, but also build connections with brands so they can sort of get to know the products better. So take a minute and just think about the types of content that seem to resonate best with your customers. You can just think of one platform and just evaluate that for a minute. Okay, as we think about that, do any of you have scenarios where the company that you work with tends to post a lot of sales messaging in social media platforms so that maybe what's happening even in your organic Facebook posts are really about sales or deals or promotions that you're trying to drive. Maybe everything you're putting on LinkedIn is about, kind of the company, the next promotion. It's really like more of a sales message than other types of messages. Anyone have that condition? I find this happens pretty frequently because, again, we think of these channels as opportunities, as ways to kind of drive more conversation around the sales or just to have an automatic conversion. We find sometimes that not only is organic content on social, is it suppressed and we have pretty low engagement there, that doesn't necessarily mean we get rid of it, but instead we want to understand what are our customers looking for in these platforms and what is the right content to be anticipating to put in these different places. The other thing we have to remember is that the platforms themselves are not a strategy. And I hear this a lot. So we say like, well, we have an Instagram strategy and we can't quite understand, the ROI. Now, if you're referring to the types of content you're developing there in order to engage your audience or to educate them or to offer customer service within Instagram, the engagement, the education, the customer service, those are strategies. But the platform itself is not a strategy. The platform is a channel. So whether it's Instagram or Twitter or anything else. And so one of the areas that we really need to work on from a business perspective and what makes us a little prone, again, to that shiny object syndrome is we think that the platform will do all the work for us. And if we just post the message there and we just kind of put our sales information there, that people will come and find us and they'll click through and they'll convert. But if you think of your own experiences, are you likely to, always click through on messaging that is sales related? Yes, no, maybe. So when we think about how we use social media to help support our digital marketing strategies, we have to do the extra work for our customers. We want to know kind of what are their challenges, and we want to create content that demonstrates we understand what they're looking for. We understand what questions they want answers. Customers are savvy to advertising. So to use kind of the vast amount of the opportunities that we have through these digital platforms to only offer sales messages is really, it just doesn't really capitalize on what we can do in these spaces. When we talk about different customer journeys or we talk about touch points or engagement, consumers today are looking at all kinds of different platforms to sort of, kind of gather their own information. They might think that they're doing research. Luckily, our algorithms can help with that. But for the most part, they feel like they're conducting this on their own and they want to understand your brand from different aspects where they're doing that research. They're looking for it to be educated. They might be looking for help. They might be looking to get a question answered. So there are lots of different reasons people engage with your brand on these platforms. They don't necessarily want to be sold to in every interaction with your brand. Okay, so how do we manage our leadership and clients and our support teams? Like, how do we get on the same page about this? Because if we have these expectations, like, wow, we should really be on Threads, right? It seems like a lot of businesses are now using Threads. So how do we integrate that? How we manage this and how we think about future-proofing our plans and our strategies. We have to really kind of step back for a minute and be willing to ask these pretty basic questions. How does this platform support our business objectives? Now, I will say these questions might be deceptively simple because sometimes we don't necessarily know how the platform ultimately helps us with any of these business objectives if we don't have a clear digital strategy. How does our customer use this platform? So on the one hand, do we even know how people are engaging on threads, or do we have anyone following us on Twitter, or do we think that our content out there, is being consumed? Do we know this? So first and foremost, like, is there a customer base there for us? Is there a place to engage? How will we measure success? Is it just going to be engagement metrics? Do we actually have it connected to anything that helps to drive a conversion? So I say conversion, not a sale, because a lot of times we're not going to be in the place where everything is driving straight to a sale. So maybe that conversion is to get them back to the website, or get them to fill out a form, or to take this next step. But we want to understand what a KPI is for this, not just any metric, but an actual KPI that helps us understand how it drove business. And then, do we have the necessary resources and the bandwidth to do this properly? So one thing that happens a lot is that if you don't work in digital marketing specifically, especially if you don't work in community management or social media, it's really easy to underestimate how much work this is. A lot of people do not understand how long it takes to create content, the importance of cadence and timing and consistency. So it is a lot of work to create content, figure out what you want to do, have a content calendar, have a process for laying out that content, monitoring it is a huge job. So it is not just something that's off the side of your desk to be taken lightly. And again, I think sometimes that's not fully understood, but part of that is because we don't necessarily connect this work back to that KPI or back to a business objective. Does that make sense? Anyone else challenged with this? So I always say this in class. There are no unicorns. The thing about social media marketing as it pertains to our digital strategy is that we hope there is an easy answer for this. It feels easy. The way that we experience digital media feels interesting. And because of those great algorithms, things tend to be a little curated for us. And so the surprise and delight aspect, or having media that sort of, has been curated for us, it makes us forget how much kind of planning and time and effort goes into this. So while it feels like it just happens, there really aren't any rainbows and unicorns behind this. It's planning, and that's the not so interesting, or not so, that doesn't really make the media or the news, right? This is the stuff that gets kind of covered up, and most of our teams are scrambling to do it really, really well. So this absolutely goes back to strategy, planning, how we execute, and how we optimize. And one of the things I love about digital media in particular is that we can optimize, because when we were in a traditional world of advertising, we had to let things, like, you launch a campaign that ran over traditional media like TV, and you'd have to let it run for a while. And then after like 3, 6, 9 months, you could be able to measure, the feedback. A lot of times it was surveys or eyeballs. So, but once it was running, unless something was going really badly and you want to pull the ads, for the most part, you just have to let them run. With digital, you can start really small. You can start a campaign that's really targeted and focused, even low budget. We call it test and learn. And you can launch something that is intended to help you gain more insight before you launch more broadly. So it's one of the things that I really love about digital marketing in particular, is that if we do have a plan and we understand how we want to execute, it gets us past these metrics that distract us. So when you hear that organic engagement is down to like 2% on social media platforms, that could easily be a rule out. Someone could come and say, well, if it's only 2%, like, why are we bothering? Because that organic piece of content is not intended to convert into a KPI. It is meant to educate. It's meant to play some other role in the process of helping your customers understand you and find you, and then come and evaluate your business where you want them to, so you can collect some data or have an engagement with them. Okay, so the impact of not having the strategy on the other side is that we can put a lot of effort into this. We can post content without having a clear understanding of what success looks like. We can post a lot of content that serves our brand, but doesn't necessarily serve the customer. So, or we can post content that is the same across every platform, which basically just says, scroll on to your customer, right? If it's not even a little bit curated to what I'm looking to see, or understanding what my experience is, what am I here for? And then also, it leads to that reactionary response. So now we're going to set up threads, and that's another plate we've got spinning down the line here. And we don't even really necessarily have our arms around what we're doing right now. So until we have that plan, in place, until we have kind of a clear strategy, sometimes we don't even feel we have the ability to take the time to evaluate these new platforms, and we end up sort of jumping in without considering all the implications. But in general, think about it just as simply as time is money. And just because the platform itself there's no cost to adopting the platform, doesn't mean there isn't significant cost in developing the content, producing it, having the cadence and the process of putting it out into those spaces and then evaluating it. There's so many steps to that process. I hope this is ringing true with a lot of you. All right, so as we look at some key takeaways here, the reminders are that it's easy to get distracted by the shiny object syndrome. It's easy to get caught up in that social media FOMO. Brands can spend millions on these in these apps with their content, and these apps can change the rules at any given time. It happened with Facebook. Apps that just disappear or they go out of business, even though big brands have invested a lot of content there. If they go out of business, that time and effort, what do we have for that? Again, do we want to become more reliant on some of these versus really understanding what these apps and these platforms do for us? So we need to look at any adoption of a new platform as a business move. So understanding our resources, how much time it costs, what's the team, do we have a plan, and do we know what our customers want? Again, social media platforms aren't the strategy in and of themselves, right? We have to understand what content we're putting on that platform. And it's really important to understand the distinction of how we execute a strategy across a platform, across different platforms, but it's not, the platform itself is not a strategy. Remember that on social media, that if you're trying to talk to everyone, you're likely talking to no one. We have a huge expectation today for personalization, thanks to our advanced experiences and thanks to the algorithms that have helped curate content that looks like it's something we want to see, for good or for bad. But for the most part, we're taking a broadcast mentality if we're just trying to put the same content everywhere, if we're only talking about ourselves and we're not engaging in these platforms in ways that helps us learn and understand customers better, or get them to a space where we can engage, get some data, understand kind of what they're looking for with measurable dynamics behind it. The other thing, it's still true with social media, is that people want to connect to other people, and so we should really think about content that can also demonstrate our brand personality, that highlights people in our company, not just sales messages. Content alone, and again, we see the engagement numbers are down, so placing organic content on social media platforms is going to disappoint you if you think that that one piece of content is going to convert your customer. We have to think a bit more about a long-term process and thinking about how the different layers of content help that person through a journey to get to know you better and prefer your company. And then, of course, again, we have to consider resources before we get to a platform, but future-proofing our digital strategies and to help us get over things like shiny object syndrome and this inclination to want to just jump in to a new or popular app, it isn't really magic. The future-proofing part is more of that long-range process of how you connect to customers, knowing how these platforms help to drive business for your brand, and so that you're mindful that when new platforms come into play, it's more about how they work for your company, and with full understanding of what the trade-offs will be once you start adopting that new platform. Okay, so I think that's my last takeaway on this. Any questions, or what? I hope that was tracking with you all. I'm going to open up chat here. Seeing lots of questions in the chat. Okay, so I think we're gathering chat questions, and I know we had some pre-selected questions. Let's move on to the live Q&A. I've got the text box. It's just laying over this slide just a little bit, Jacqueline.
Oh, we don't see anything, Nicole, so all good on our end. Good. But thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. That was super insightful. I know not only for everyone I see in the chat, but for myself as well. So thank you for that. And as Nicole mentioned, we're now going to move into our Q&A session where we'll answer some of your questions. We did have some fantastic pre-submitted questions that you sent in during registration, and our team has gone through them to identify common themes. We also encourage you to keep sending through your questions that have been coming through the Q&A. They've been fantastic so far, and I think will lend to a very lively conversation. So our first question for you, Nicole, is what are the general skills versus platform skills you need to succeed in digital marketing?
Great question. And I was really happy to see this question come about. And by the way, I saw a couple of questions here in chat too that I'll answer once we get through a couple of these. So I just so you know, yeah. So I think in general, and I think this is really can be challenging for folks to understand. I think in general, a person that's going to succeed in social media marketing, digital marketing overall, is someone that can really multitask. And I mean that to say, like, you don't get too overwhelmed by having a lot of inputs at once. You have to have enough sort of emotional maturity to know not to be overreactionary. You have to, I think more and more today, you really need to have the bandwidth and a little bit of a stomach for criticism to know to not overreact to situations, but then also really have the mindset of like, when do I need to escalate something? How do I this as great information? How do I, receive this? And then how do I respond and keep things kind of moving? So not just ignoring. So I think in general, good skills to have are just great communications. So attention to detail, grammar, make sure that, that's just kind of the starter, right? But then also really being able to manage kind of a lot of kind of inputs at once and being able to pivot really quickly. So this is something that I do think is a unique skill set for someone that's going into this space.
Fantastic. That was super helpful insights. And it looks like in the chat, people are resonating with what you're saying.
That's good.
A follow-up to that would be, what resources would you recommend or even skills to someone who's new to the digital marketing sphere?
Yeah, I think so again, I think, you testing out your own kind of appetite for being able to manage this. Then also, I think to kind of resources where I would start if you're new to this, start in a place where you can take like a free course. And I would go to like one of the Google courses or one of the Facebook kind of trainings, do something light just to sort of learn how their platforms work. See if you like it. See if you can like if it bores you, if it's something that you think is cool and you want to do more, I would start in those free places and then build from there. So there's plenty of things online that serve as that first taste kind of boot camp without investing, money to go through a program. And I know here I am talking for Harvard PDP, so it's not meant to be. You can tell that it's a real recommendation that this is where you should start. As you get better at this, now you start to understand because digital marketing is not a monolith. We need people that specialize in metrics. We need people that specialize in the advertising piece. We need people that specialize in community management. So those are things you want to understand so you can start kind of curating your education then or your training to those preferences.
Fantastic. That was super helpful. And one question that came in through the chat earlier was, what can small brands do to differentiate themselves in this saturated digital space?
Yeah, I think that this is a great question, and I'm glad it came up because a lot of times most of the examples we see are big companies, and I didn't reference it earlier, but a lot of times big companies aren't having these challenges with it's like they'll just adopt threads, they can afford to add a few more people to their agency team or who else kind of manages this. But small companies have a huge advantage in the sense that you can focus on one platform, do it really well. A lot of times small companies can be much more nimble. So you can, really get a closer kind of look at like if I place an ad, like what was my return on that and scale up from there. But also a lot of times you don't have the onerous level of approvals. Your brand voice can be much more clear because you're a small brand and it's not something that is overthinking. You have a much more transparent interaction with your customers. And a lot of times what they'll do is rally behind you because most people want to support small businesses. So you can really thread the right messaging there to really get people to understand your mission and that you're trying so hard. And I think in digital in particular, I think that's an advantage. I think in social media platforms, that's a huge advantage.
Fantastic. And kind of along the same lines, someone had asked, should there be different strategies used for nonprofits and political organizations compared to corporate organizations?
It's a great question. And it goes back to the idea of like the strategy versus the execution. So no digital plan is, again, if there isn't a one size fits all. I wish that would be so great. We could just kind of like just rock this right out. But No, what I would say is that I think the different types of strategies can be used in any type of organization, but specifically for nonprofits and kind of organizations where you feel like you are a bit removed from sales, I would really focus on the types of strategies around like education and storytelling that are often really overlooked in this space, that are huge opportunities to really help the people that follow you understand the core of your foundation and to really bring those to life in a way that people feel like they discover it because they found you in these digital platforms, not because it's pushed out through an ad.
I think your emphasis too on, talking about the storytelling aspect is resonates probably with so many people here, and it's so important. And kind of along those lines too, when it comes to assessing digital content strategy, what is the best to keep in mind when evaluating what works and what no longer serves our audience?
Yeah, the what works and what no longer works. Again, a lot of times we just don't really have a good connection between what we're measuring and why. So what works if we're just looking at maybe engagement metrics or vanity metrics, sometimes we're not really sure, what is working because we haven't really connected it to a proper KPI. Did this actually help us meet an objective? So if I'm working with a B2B company, for example, and again, I'm not selling a product like that, like in a store. So it's very hard. We can feel hard to discern ROI if I can't actually say this many ads yielded this many sales. Click here, bought the product, easy. So I think a lot of times with content, for example, we have to then look at what is a conversion. How many people did we get to take a next step? How much did people interact with us in a way that we understand where they went from there? Was it part of a bigger plan so we can really assess what's working? Otherwise, you're going to stay in that subjective space. And I'm not saying you can't use subjective to start with, but if you're really wanting to say, do we need to leave this or do we need to abandonment, you really want to have some numbers behind you.
Fantastic. And a few people have some questions kind of off of what you just said. How frequently should you relook and update your strategy? And how can you ensure your digital strategy is updated to reflect the agile digital ecosystem, but also stay true to your brand and its objective?
I see that question right here. I was just going to answer that. And I know that person. So hello, thank you for coming. Yeah, it's a great question. The agile ecosystem is a whole nother beast. So, and I think you probably know that where I'm going with that. And the issue is that what I'm finding is that for companies that have not figured out that core digital strategy and what they want to do, it's even harder when they're starting to get presented with all these new technologies and digital transformation that's requiring this agile performance marketing expectation. So the reason I was keeping this talk a little more gated and kind of focused on like, hey, let's start making business evaluations is for the bigger reason here that you're going to, which is that you cannot be making sort of off the cuff decisions. We can't be jumping into a platform here and here when we have all these other things that have to be processed. So what we really have to do with these new agile technologies is we have to get even more organized across these functional teams and understanding specifically that we have to even arm like our brand team. So how do we know that it's updated? Is does our brand team understand this process? Are there ways to gather data in different, more traditional aspects of digital marketing? This is something that's relatively new. So it starts to ask if you're looking at the whole as opposed to just complete campaigns. So, an understanding how the digital strategy needs to come together toward transformation, our digital strategy should help us inform what we should be doing next. That event was super successful. We got all our signups. What we're learning is that people really prefer this type of candy that we sell. And now we want to look at, okay, how do we adopt this? How do we test and learn? And how do we make a use case for this to try it with a different product in our arsenal? Does that make sense to you? It's hard for me to be super specific because obviously there's so many different tools that you can
Yes.
use, right? So there are different digital tools, there's different ways to gather data. I think I think it's hard to say like how frequently should you update your strategy? I think you should be revisiting your strategy. I think the optimization is as frequent as you can do the campaigns end to end, get the key learnings. What did we take from this? How do we use that in our next campaign? So I
Fantastic.
think it's continual, a little bit continual.
Perfect. And I know you mentioned that you saw some great questions come in. Are there any other ones you want to address on this topic before we pivot over to a few other content areas?
I was just looking through, that was one of them that I found, and that was kind of a two-parter, right? Um, Marketing strategy in a fashion brand, the post content. I'm sorry that it's a little cut off here. Do you have specific tips for nonprofits with digital marketing, especially for fundraising? I think with fundraising, like anything else, it's still your KPI is how much money did we raise, right? So I think in that digital strategy, it's similar to anything where you're making a sale. I think you just kind of pivot your mindset about what it means to raise money versus make a sale. I think in general, though, what I don't see enough of nonprofits doing are spending time on the front end of the storytelling and really telling the story, not telling your business story, but really getting into the story and helping people understand and helping them be able to find it on their own. So the one thing, and I saw something too around healthcare, same for healthcare, two different industries, same need for the strategy of storytelling placed in areas where people feel like they're finding it based on their own research as they're looking for answers.
Fantastic. And now I guess a question is a bit more broad. Do you think digital media is replacing traditional media?
Um, yes, I think it is, except I don't think we're seeing the end of traditional media. I think many of you are working in a space and probably know this, that we still need a sign that is branded, right? If you're at an event, you still want to have your branding sitting around. We still have industry publications that draw the right eyeballs because they're doctors and nurses, and these aren't people that we can reach without their MPI numbers. So we need those publications to just even have some brand recognition for affiliation. However, to think it's not so much about digital and traditional, it's the entirety of someone's journey and where they interact with brands and what do they need to be seen to be reminded and prompted back in. But we are in a world now where it's not about are you using digital or not. Digital is like, is just like another element to most people today. You don't even have to be a digital native. I'm not a digital native to be thinking in terms. The expectation is that their information lives in a digital space. So I think traditional still is necessary. If you talk to anyone in retail, they know you still need shelf talkers in certain retail spaces. They know you need end styles and pop display. So it would be, I think it would be kind of leading to say, okay, well, this can all be digital now, because we still need that, that stimulus in real life that still exists.
Fantastic. And we're going to do just about two more questions.
Okay.
Someone asked, can you leverage social media and digital marketing in places where there isn't good or stable internet access or scattered customers around the world?
That's challenging to answer. I would need to know more about that condition, because it's hard for me to say. I think it doesn't. I think you could still have digital messaging. I think you could still offer information for when people could find you. I think you would probably have to roll back the expectations on your availability or interaction, because let's say, so clearly I think if we we're saying a strategy like customer service might be a strategy you would employ, that could be tricky if you're not able to connect frequently. So maybe you would just need to set the expectations that content is there, and you're refreshing it to make sure it's helpful, but you can't necessarily change the conditions around the accessibility.
Fantastic. And this will be our last question of the session. Thank you all for your fantastic questions. How do you measure the ROI of digital campaigns?
Sure. I think I was referring to this just a little bit before, but it's important. It's good to remind, and it's a good thing to leave with, because it actually goes back to the whole point of this webinar. It's like, how do we future proof? How do we know, kind of what comes next, and how do we avoid falling into a trap of just chasing platforms because they seem like they're cool? So it really comes down to, if you want to know about ROI, you really have to look at, and if you're just going to isolate it for social media, for example, you need to understand what are the hours that it costs, or what are the hours that we put on an agency or on our team. Agencies, sometimes it can be easier to measure when you use an agency because you have billable hours. What did that cost? What did it cost for the materials, the photography, the content? What was our total cost for that? And then how did it end up supporting the business? But we have to look at social media and the content that we're building as a cost. It's not just something that we're clever and we post things online and yield the results from that. When it comes to our greater digital plans, ROI, you have to be talking about measurement and what you're measuring and what is the KPI at the start of any campaign. We are not starting this with like the idea, like, let's just post something and hopefully people will come and find and buy our products. So instead, you want to be looking specifically at, what am I doing as I plan for this? what do we actually want to measure? What can we measure? Because sometimes we would like to measure that sale, and we're not going to be able to access that because sales have to happen in person, or because you're in healthcare and sales have to happen through a rep. You can't sell your products online. So instead, we have to consider what is the KPI that we can measure to demonstrate that our digital is working. So I look at marketing qualified leads, for example, or whatever conversion exists to say this person came through my journey, this content worked through these processes, and that conversion was met through the content we developed. And we learned that maybe no one actually reads this piece of content, so we're going to upgrade this. And we are able to track that journey and measure along the way. But that measurement are leading performance indicators. The KPI is what you're actually able to produce and say, this is how we drove business. We got 50 leads out of this based on our $10,000 investment for this campaign. Then it's over to the sales team. So how many of those 50 leads did they make new customers? Sometimes that's where we have to leave it when we're in digital marketing, if we don't have the capacity to do end to end. But it's still very measurable, and it's still something you want to consider whether or not you touch that actual sale. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that made perfect sense. And I think those were some fantastic takeaways. But so thank you again, Nicole, for those insights. And thank you to everyone for your thoughtful questions. If you have any questions about our program, send us an email at pdp@dce.harvard.edu. And if you'd like to continue the conversation and learn more about digital marketing strategy, join Nicole on October 30th here at Harvard for our next program. Many of our previous participants have found Nicole's program very insightful. As you can see, Chris here said it was a 10 out of 10 and would definitely do it again. That will conclude our presentation for today. Thank you, Nicole, for your insights, and thanks to all of you for attending our webinar. Please follow us on social media or visit our website to keep updated on our programs. Within the next few days, a recording of this webinar will be sent to the email address you used to register for this event. And it was so great to have you join us today. We hope you have a lovely rest of your day and hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.